Hello there, you're watching The Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we're going to be talking through the headlines with the author and journalist Ella Whelan and author and historian at Oxford University, Peter Frankopan. So a very good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both. So let's take a look then at what's making those front pages. And the Sunday Telegraph talks vouchers for vaccines as it analyses the government's plans to incentivise COVID-19 vaccinations. Kebabs for jabs reads the front of the Sunday People as it also looks at vaccine rewards. The Sunday Times reports that Rishi Sunak has urged the Prime Minister to lift travel restrictions with the headline, "Dump travel rules to save holidays." The Observer leads with warnings from Keir Starmer's aides who say the Labour Party has lost touch with target voters. Carrie and Boris Johnson's baby joy is the focus of the Sun on Sunday's front page. And Boris's baby news also makes the main story of the Sunday Express, which reads, "Incredibly blessed." While the Daily Star Sunday's headline about the Prime Minister reads, "So that's what he's been doing in the lockdown." I don't know what they mean by that. Let's bring in then Ella Whelan and Peter Frankopan to go through those front pages. And Ella, let's start with the Sunday Express, which is one of the papers that's led with the news today that Carrie Johnson is pregnant. Incredibly blessed is a line that she used when she broke the news on Instagram today, wasn't it?
Yes, and isn't it a funny thing, breaking the news on Instagram? It strikes me as such a modern way to do it. Perhaps good because it's tapping into a younger generation, but I still think this kind of, not quite that she's like a first lady, but the sort of formal news like this, Instagram seems like a weird format to do it. But anyway, here we are, and news of a new baby is always a lovely thing and should be celebrated. I quite like the headlines that are joking about the fact that they got between the sheets throughout lockdown, because it makes Boris Johnson seem a little bit more normal. I think there has been a sort of proselytization of him as having to be this perfect sort of saint-like figure, which he often falls short of throughout, and that politicians are sort of a little bit abnormal. But if this is, doing what most couples have been doing, there's not much else to do over the last 16 months, then congratulations to them. And she's named it a rainbow baby, which is in some other bits of the paper, which is a term that people use when they have a positive pregnancy test and the hopes of a baby coming after loss or death. And so that's a really nice thing.
Well, that's right. And in fact, Peter, if we look inside the Sun on Sunday, they've led on the story on their front page, but inside as well, they've got a double-page spread here that you've picked out saying "our rainbow." It's a term I hadn't heard before, actually, but she has been very open about the fact that she did have a miscarriage earlier this year and said that she deliberately wanted to share that information to give some kind of comfort to other people who might be going through the same thing.
Well, it's a hugely traumatic experience for any couple and for any would-be mother to experience, and I think it's absolutely right. Quite a few of the newspapers tomorrow are making the point that it's the last real taboo to be able to talk about that kind of loss and what it means physically, emotionally, and the pressure that it puts. And so I think it's rather beautiful to call it, for Carrie to say that she's incredibly blessed. I mean, as Ella says, it's a very modern way of announcing it, but I suppose Number 10 has also got an eye on trying to get the communications right, and by offering a story to one of the newspapers, it puts them in pole position. And what clearly, I guess, Number 10 is trying to do is to draw a line on the one hand between the couple's private life and the fact that we're now going to have a Prime Minister in office with 2 children under the age of 2. And I think anybody who's had small children or been in a room with small children knows that concentrating on the day job is quite difficult when you live above where you work. So, wishing them all the best. It's obviously great news, and lift the couple, lift the country too. Wonderful. In fact, what Ella says about everyone's been doing it. In fact, funnily enough, it's sort of slightly counterintuitive. In fact, there's been a big, not a baby boom. There's been a baby bust because of COVID in the developed, rich world. Lots of people have been putting off having children, and there haven't been the same frequency of one-night stands for very obvious reasons that sometimes lead to unintended consequences. And so, in fact, Boris is going against the grain in this one, because, in fact, it's going to be quite a small school year that the new one will go into because of people's sexual practices as we've been all locked down.
Something I didn't expect to be talking about this evening, but there you go, interesting stuff. Some of us have been working from home, actually, during lockdown. Anyway, let's move on to the Sunday Times front page story, shall we? And they are focusing on the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, apparently, according to the Sunday Times, putting pressure on to try and lift travel restrictions. There is a review coming up later this week, on Thursday, I think, Ella, and he wants a lot of the restrictions dumped for the sake of the economy, I think is his argument, isn't it?
Yeah, so he's apparently written to Boris Johnson, and in the sort of way in which Boris has had, I don't know if you can quite put it, a devil and an angel on his shoulder, depending on your view of lockdown restrictions continuing. There certainly has been conflicting views being whispered in his ear on whether to go hard on continuing lockdown measures, whether to come off and take his foot off the pedal and get back to or get forward to a kind of new normal. And Rishi Sunak has been one of those quite strident voices for a while now, suggesting that the cost to the economy and the cost to people's wages, to their jobs, to the wider scope of the employment market is too much to bear moving forward with more lockdown restrictions. And a key part of that is obviously travel. And what Rishi Sunak is picking up on here is not just the fact that the tourism industry has taken a hit. It's not just the fact that the travel industry, as we saw in previous lockdowns, has come out kind of kicking and screaming, wanting to get some kind of business going back again. But it's a more general sense in which actually going on holiday isn't just about having a jolly. It's also about people traveling, people bringing income back in to the country. And so, it's a fair position to have. And the crucial thing is when we are getting to a point at which vaccination levels are rising, are doing very well. There's been a very positive take-up of the vaccine in this country. There's the reasons to remain locked down and the reasons to remain in a kind of restrictive setting lessen as the vaccine rollout becomes more successful. So a little bit of positivity like this, I think, is to be welcomed.
And yet there will be some, no doubt some in government as well, Peter, who are more cautious, aren't they? They worry about losing that vaccine advantage, if you can call it that, by allowing people to come into the country, potentially bringing other variants with them.
Well, I think that's clearly the big debate on the science side of how do we balance new variations picking up either in Europe or beyond, and trying to work that all out. And I think that the jury is out. I mean, it's been quite a good 10 days of falling cases, but the real worry is mutations of concern that provide a much bigger challenge for us to deal with as we go into the winter months. But I mean, it's, I suppose, interesting about this story that both the Sunday Times and the Sun take, and of course their stablemates as newspapers. But it's quite astute positioning from Rishi Sunak. I suppose it's a bit like Carrie Johnson announcing on Instagram. I presume the Chancellor didn't have to write Boris a letter that he told everybody about. He could have nobbled him in the corridors of number 10 or number 11 Downing Street. So some of this, I suppose, is about the Chancellor positioning himself to be saying, look, I'm on the side of those wanting to have a more liberal approach, even though he's been quite hawkish through the process. But, this week, British Airways announced that it lost £2 billion. Airlines are really expensive to keep on the ground, and getting them back up in the air is a real headache. So there's got to be something that starts to get the economy going. And I think opening those borders is a key part of that.
And do you think also, Peter, you say that he's positioning himself on one side of the party, if you like, but do you think he's also trying to send out a popular message to people? Lots of people like going on holiday, after all.
I think so. I mean, he's had a good pandemic, Rishi, no doubt about that. He's presentable, he's eloquent, he's been in front of the guns when he's needed to be. And some of the other schemes in the papers that we'll talk about a bit later is about what kind of incentives could be given to encourage people to get vaccinated. So, I think he's very competent, but there's no question, I think, that while we all have the impression that a lot of government is arguing with each other, having a sort of racing line that you stick to and that you are being reasonable about, it's quite good to show that you're a credible future leader, as I think Sunak has done quite well.
And let's talk about those incentives, Ella, because it makes the front page of The Observer, elsewhere in the papers as well. The news that various incentives will be offered. They look like they're targeting young people to try to encourage them to get vaccinated. It looks like we may have had talk of sticks, talk of people being stopped from doing things if they weren't double vaccinated, and now it looks like we're getting carrots. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Kind of a mix of a stick and a carrot. I mean, we remember the Eat Out to Help Out and the government scheme to incentivize people to get out. It's a kind of similar thing going on here with young people, where Uber and Bolt and Deliveroo and lots of other companies that predominantly 18 to 25-year-olds use quite frequently, cabs and takeaways and that kind of thing, could be involved in a government scheme to get, the situation at the moment is that about 60% of young people of that age bracket have had at least one jab, but to make sure that they continue and finish their jab program and get the second one, there could be this suggestion of carrots. And it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think that you don't want to go down the route of France, where you have essentially vaccine passports now being instituted pretty much in any kind of fun public space, whether it be a cafe, a bar, or a concert. But the sort of carrot angle, the trying to incentivize things, only I think should be rolled out if there's a real downturn. And actually what we've seen is among young people, whether it's them queuing outside of Twickenham, whether it's actually levels of young people volunteering as vaccinators. I've been doing a few shifts as a vaccinator, and it's always full of young people, even in care roles or actually sticking needles in people's arms. There's been quite a positive response to it. And so maybe building on that positive response, perhaps with a few Deliveroo vouchers, but more actually a kind of political message that says to continue this societal good, this social project of getting out this virus together that we have in the shape of the vaccine programme. Perhaps we could do with that too.
Well, yes, that's right. And we've learnt today that possible plans that were certainly floated, Peter, about telling students they had to have 2 jabs if they were going to be able to stay in a hall of residence or attend lectures even, have been abandoned. That doesn't seem to be happening. So does it feel like incentives is the way the government is likely to go from here on in?
Well, you both sound like you've been living in a different household to me over lockdown. The idea that anyone's going to want to eat a carrot rather than, I think it's the kebabs for jabs would seem to be more plausible. Young people are incredibly smart, and they're incredibly sophisticated in the way in which they share information and share information quickly. And I think that, as some of the stories are pointing out in the Star and other places, 60% of 18 to 25-year-olds have had one jab. And so it seems that if you're part of the 40%, you might as well stick around and wait and get a bit of freebies and free kit to come round, and presumably that'll happen with the second jab too. So the problem about offering incentives is that the people who've already had their shot and their jab, who've been good citizens, then don't get their frappuccinos or their pizzas or their kebabs or whatever it might be. So calibrating how that works and why it's 18 to 25 and not up to 30. I feel bad myself that I didn't stick around and wait. I mean, some countries in Russia, to get a jab, you can enter a lottery to win a snowmobile. So, maybe and kebabs are too low. So other countries are doing it in a kind of lottery system that if you need to be persuaded, put your name in and we'll pull out a few lucky winners. The problem is if you make small incentives for people, then of course the market will take hold itself, and young people who communicate faster and quicker than people my age will work out how to play the system to get the best possible reward, quite rightly.
I think there are a lot of students who'd pick the kebab over the snowmobile any day. Although, who knows, it could be fun. We're going to take a pause right there. Coming up, though, after the break, following the 3-2 diet, what office workers apparently want as we come out of COVID. More on that in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching The Press Preview, and with me tonight are the journalist and author Ella Whelan and the author and historian at Oxford University, Peter Frankopan. So welcome back to both of you. Peter, we're going to kick off this section with the double-page spread inside the Sunday Times, and this is focusing on what has been an incredibly disappointing turn of events for Dina Asher-Smith.
Well, Dina was carrying the hopes of the country, and I think there were many who were expecting her to come home in potentially with 2 or even 3 gold medals in the 100, 200 and the relay. And the amount of pressure that she was under beforehand, she dealt with having not performed as we'd all hoped in the semi-final today. Incredibly brave and dignified. She came straight back out and announced that she'd torn a hamstring 5 weeks ago and had kept that quiet, and said, look, at this level, tiny fractions make tiny differences, and, I'm going to pull out of the 200. And I think the way that she confronted it head on, how she spoke about, this is just how life is. If it had been any other point in the last 5 years, apart from in these last 5 weeks, she'd have been a proper medal contender, and perhaps even for gold. Heartbreaking, but the bravery just shows what goes into all those early mornings, all those late nights, all those ice baths, all the amount of training that goes into these Olympics. And the human stories, I think Dina has given such a credit, I think, to what proper athletics is all about. It's not about winning medals. As she said, there'll be plenty of other competitions that she'll win in the future. And I think that she'll be carrying the wins of the entire nation behind her when that happens. So desperately sad for her personally. But my gosh, the way that she dealt with it was incredibly impressive.
Absolutely, and so heartbreaking for her after, as you say, years of training, and then just the timing is appalling, isn't it? We send our sympathies to her. And finally, let's just take a quick look, Ella, at a very different story. This is inside the Sunday Times. They're talking about the 3-2 diet, but it's they're not talking about food, are they?
No, this is the work-life balance, and based on a couple of bits of research. One quite interesting one from YouGov, which showed that only a fifth of bosses say they'll require all staff to come in for 5 days a week. This is mentioned in the article. There's a suggestion that the new normal could be 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or some variation on that. And, lots of people will be readdressing their work-life balance and their working habits throughout this period of strangeness. I want to really make a plea for going back into places of work, for redelineating between the public and private sphere, not because I think offices are fantastic places to be, or factories, or anywhere else where that's outside of the home. It's quite nice to sit and pet the cat and make yourself a cup of tea while you're working. But think about what happens to our town centres, our cities, our our public spaces if we aren't there. I think one of the most dystopian parts of the last 16 months has been going into central London. I don't know if you guys have done it, walking across Millennium Bridge with no one there, and then people wonder why all the prep workers are getting let off. We need a public square to be filled with the public, and that can't happen if we work from home.
Sorry to cut you off. We are out of time, but we can revisit this in the next hour. Ella and Peter, thanks very much indeed for now.